The moment Muhammad Ali walked into Saddam Hussein's palace, the room fell silent. Guards froze mid-step, chandeliers sparkled in the sunlight, and even the hum of distant conversations seemed to vanish. It wasn't every day that a man, known across the world as the greatest, strode into one of the most heavily guarded palaces on earth. And yet, Ali moved with the calm confidence of someone who had faced far more than armies and dictators. He had faced fear itself, and fear had always backed down. Inside the grand hall, Saddam Hussein sat on a massive golden throne, flanked by advisors and security officers. The dictator's eyes narrowed as he observed this unusual guest. Here was a man dressed in casual clothes, not military fatigues, not diplomatic attire, just Muhammad Ali, legendary boxer, outspoken activist, and global icon. No bodyguards, no entourage, just Ali's towering presence, his aura of confidence and the weight of his reputation preceding him. For a moment, it seemed as if time had paused. The palace, with its opulent carpets, glimmering chandeliers, and marble floors, had seen countless rulers, generals, and ambassadors. Yet none had commanded attention quite like this man. Ali's sharp eyes scanned the room, not in fear, not in intimidation, but in quiet calculation. Every movement, every expression sent a subtle message. He was here for a reason, and he was not to be dismissed. Saddam, known for his ruthless control, clenched his fists. He had met powerful men before, men who bowed, flattered, or trembled in his presence. Ali, however, radiated something different. There was a challenge in his calm. A reminder that not all battles were fought in rings or with weapons. Some were fought with presence, courage, and an unshakable spirit. The guards exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered, "Is this really Muhammad Ali?" Others tightened their grip on the palace gates, unsure if they should step forward or stay frozen in place. Every eye in the room was now fixed on Ali, and every mind questioned what might happen next. Then Ali took a step forward, unflinching, and spoke. His voice carried not arrogance, but certainty, a subtle warning wrapped in politeness. "I'm here to see you," he said simply, "and I expect honesty." A ripple of tension shot through the room. Everyone knew the next few minutes could change the entire atmosphere of the palace. No one could predict what would happen when the greatest boxer of all time faced one of the most feared leaders on earth. And yet, despite the tension, one thing was clear. Muhammad Ali had already arrived, and the world was about to watch. The grand palace of Saddam Hussein was like a world apart, a glittering labyrinth of gold, marble, and velvet. Outside, the heat of Baghdad pressed against the walls, but inside the air was cool, conditioned, and heavy with tension. Every detail reflected power. Gilded columns, priceless carpets imported from across the world, intricate chandeliers hanging like frozen stars, and servants moving silently, like shadows trained to obey without question. And yet, in all this grandeur, one presence seemed to eclipse it all: Muhammad Ali. Ali didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every step he took echoed softly against the polished floors, measured, confident, deliberate. His eyes, sharp and calm, took in every detail: the guards' positions, the subtle glances of Saddam's advisors, even the slight twitch in one of the dictator's fists. Ali had faced pressure before, immense pressure. The ring had taught him more than punches. It had taught him timing, reading people, controlling energy, and holding unwavering confidence in the most dangerous moments. Saddam, meanwhile, watched from his throne with a mix of curiosity and irritation. He had heard of Muhammad Ali, of course. Everyone had. The man who had defied governments, who had refused the Vietnam draft, who had turned boxing into a global stage for justice and pride. But seeing Ali in person, walking freely through the heart of his palace, unarmed, unguarded, was something else entirely. It was unexpected. Advisors whispered behind their hands. One said, "Sir, this man, he is the champion of the world." Another murmured, "Does he know who he is speaking to?" Guards tightened their stances, shifting nervously, unsure whether to intervene or wait for orders. But Ali's calm aura did something strange. It made them hesitate. Here was a man who seemed untouchable, not through weapons or threats, but through presence. Ali stopped a few meters from the throne and bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, but not of submission. "I've come to speak," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, clear, calm, but firm. "I came because the world is watching, and I believe honesty matters even here." Saddam's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the throne's golden arms. "And why should I speak with you, Muhammad Ali?" he asked, his tone measured but tinged with curiosity. He was used to people flattering him, fearing him, but Ali spoke like an equal, never yielding, never bending. Ali smiled faintly. Because, sir, I've faced giants in my life. I've faced fear, power, and the impossible. And I know when someone is hiding behind walls of gold and threats. The world needs to hear the truth, and I am here to make sure it's not ignored. A hush fell over the room. Even the servants paused mid-step. Every person present felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't a fight of fists, it was a confrontation of wills, of courage, of principle versus power. And Muhammad Ali, as always, exuded confidence without arrogance. He didn't need to raise his voice or make a scene. His presence alone demanded attention. Saddam leaned back slightly, assessing Ali with careful eyes. Could this man be intimidated? Could he be swayed? Or would he stand his ground? It was rare for someone to enter his palace and make him question not just authority, but respect. Ali had done it in seconds. For Ali, the palace was just another arena. He moved with the same purpose he had in countless boxing matches: read the opponent, gauge the environment, remain calm, and strike not with violence, but with conviction. And in that moment, everyone inside understood this wasn't just a meeting. It was a lesson in courage, and the world outside the palace walls would soon be watching every second of it. The air in the palace thickened with tension as Muhammad Ali and Saddam Hussein faced each other. What had begun as a quiet, calculated entrance now teetered on the edge of confrontation. Every advisor, every guard, every servant held their breath. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a collision of personalities, of reputations, of history itself. Ali's eyes were steady, scanning the room, yet always returning to Saddam. The dictator sat tall on his throne, adorned in white robes, his expression carefully neutral. Though subtle cracks betrayed his growing irritation, he had spent decades commanding fear, orchestrating obedience, controlling every gesture, every word of everyone around him. And yet, here was a man, a boxer, yes, but also a vocal critic, a global icon who dared enter his palace and speak as if the world were watching him, not Saddam. "Why are you here?" Saddam asked, his voice low, carrying authority but tinged with suspicion. Ali's lips curled into a calm, almost imperceptible smile. "I am here because some things cannot be ignored. Power may rule, but truth must be seen. And some lessons only happen face to face." Saddam's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the throne's golden arms. His advisors stiffened, expecting a scene, an insult, or perhaps a demand. But Ali remained composed, serene even, radiating confidence. "You speak boldly for a man who enters my palace unannounced," Saddam said. "Do you know who you are addressing?" "I do," Ali replied evenly. "I know the world sees you as a powerful man. But true power is not in fear. True power is in respect." A tense silence followed. The guards' hands twitched near their weapons, though none moved. The advisors whispered in hurried Arabic, translating the moment to one another. "He's unshakable. He doesn't flinch. He won't bend." Ali's voice then softened, yet carried a sharp conviction. "I've faced giants in the ring. I've faced armies, governments, and prejudice. I've stood where others fell. And I know courage when I see it, and when I need to summon it." Saddam's lips pressed together. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed curiosity, perhaps even a hint of admiration. No one had ever spoken to him like this in his palace. The silence was so profound that even the distant hum of the palace air system seemed louder. Then, Ali took a step closer, not aggressively, not defiantly, but purposefully. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. "You hold power over many," he continued. "But power without conscience, power without respect, eventually crumbles. I am not here to challenge you with fists. I am here to challenge the choices that shape men, nations, and legacies." The advisors tensed. This was more than conversation, it was confrontation. Saddam had faced opposition, but never like this. A man who commanded attention, demanded respect, and yet radiated calm authority. Ali's presence alone seemed to bend the atmosphere, forcing even seasoned soldiers to question their instincts. Finally, Saddam spoke, his voice sharper this time. "You speak boldly, Muhammad Ali, but words are cheap. Actions define men. What proof do you have of your conviction?" Ali paused, letting the question hang in the air. Then he lifted his hand slightly, a subtle gesture reminiscent of a boxer entering the ring, steady, controlled, unwavering. "I do not need to prove my strength with violence. My life, my choices, and the way I face the world are proof enough. But if you wish to see strength, observe it in truth, in courage and standing firm when fear surrounds you." For the first time, Saddam leaned back, studying Ali intently. He had been challenged before, yes, but never with such calm precision, never with such undeniable presence. Ali was a storm contained in human form, powerful yet controlled. Fearless yet composed. The tension in the palace reached a peak. Guards shifted uneasily, advisors murmured among themselves, and even the servants watched, frozen, sensing that history was being written in this very hall. The world outside might never fully understand what was happening, but inside everyone felt it. The collision of courage versus control, principle versus power, legend versus dictator. Ali, sensing the rising unease, smiled faintly. "The world is watching, sir," he said softly but firmly. "And history will judge us, not by who sits on a throne, but by the respect we earn, and the courage we show when no one else dares." Saddam's expression wavered, just slightly. For a brief, fleeting moment, the unshakable dictator confronted something unexpected, a man who could not be intimidated, a man who stood not with weapons or threats, but with presence, conviction, and principle. And in that moment, everyone in the palace, guards, advisors, even the dictator himself, knew that this meeting was no ordinary encounter. This was not about politics or power. This was about respect, courage, and the undeniable force of Muhammad Ali. The hall was silent for what felt like an eternity, but in truth, it was only a few seconds. Seconds that carried the weight of decades. Guards who had never questioned orders now shifted uneasily on their feet. Advisors whispered hurriedly, glancing at each other. Then at Saddam, their voices trembling with uncertainty. Even the polished marble walls seemed to hum with tension, reflecting the gravity of the moment. Muhammad Ali's calm composure radiated like a quiet storm, and everyone in the palace sensed it. Saddam Hussein leaned back on his throne, his expression carefully measured, yet for the first time in years, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. Here was a man, an outsider, a foreigner, a mere athlete by some standards, standing inside his palace with a confidence that rivaled his own. Ali did not bow excessively, he did not plead, he did not attempt to charm or intimidate. He simply was. And that presence, that unwavering focus, was enough to disrupt the carefully constructed hierarchy of fear Saddam had built around him. The advisors exchanged anxious glances. One murmured under his breath, "Sir, he is not afraid. He does not bend, not like others." Another whispered, This could be dangerous." But even as fear gripped some, awe gripped others. There was a sense that Ali's courage, quiet and deliberate, was infectious. It made one question authority and reconsider what power truly meant. Saddam cleared his throat and attempted to regain control. "You speak of courage, Muhammad Ali, but words alone do not alter reality. Do you understand where you are?" His voice carried authority, but it wavered ever so slightly, a small crack that Ali immediately recognized. Ali tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I understand perfectly," he said calmly. "I understand that fear can rule many, but courage rules the soul. And even here, within these walls, courage cannot be ignored." At this, a subtle ripple of unease passed through the room. Guards shifted again, our hands lingering near weapons. Advisors stiffened, unsure whether to intervene or remain frozen. They had seen defiance before, but never with such quiet confidence, never with such undeniable strength of character. Ali's words were not loud, but they resonated deeper than any shout could have. Saddam's eyes narrowed, and his fist clenched ever so slightly on the arm of the throne. He had faced opposition, sure, rebellions, foreign powers, critics, but never like this. He had met threats with violence, with intimidation, with strict control. Yet Ali did not threaten. He did not challenge in conventional terms. His power was subtle, yet undeniable. The hall seemed to shrink around him, the atmosphere charged with tension and anticipation. Then, Ali took a deliberate step forward. The floor seemed to echo under his movement, each footfall a measured statement. "You may command armies," he said softly yet firmly. "You may hold fear over others, but true respect is earned, not demanded. And the world is watching whether you like it or not." A hush fell again, heavier this time. Even Saddam's inner circle stopped whispering, holding their collective breath. The dictator's expression hardened, but behind it, an unfamiliar tension shimmered. Could a single man, a mere athlete, really hold this kind of sway? Could his words and presence make a palace filled with power and intimidation pause? The answer, in that instant, became terrifyingly clear: yes. The tension built like a tightly wound spring. The guards' fingers twitched on their weapons, yet none dared move. Advisors muttered apologies to each other in hushed tones, some thinking that Ali's courage might cost them dearly. But still, he stood there, unwavering. His gaze never faltered, his voice never rose. And yet, the room, the palace, the dictator himself, seemed to bend, if only slightly, under the weight of his calm, steadfast presence. Then came a moment even more surreal. The courtiers, trained to act without question, began to murmur among themselves. He does not fear him. He is not intimidated. Look at him, he stands as if he owns the room. It was true. Ali owned the room, not with wealth, not with violence, not with threats, but with something far more powerful: courage, conviction, and an unshakable belief in himself. Saddam exhaled sharply, a long breath that seemed to carry decades of authority and pride. His eyes scanned Ali, trying to pierce the calm, but there was nothing to pierce. The man's courage was a shield, his presence a force, and the entire palace felt it. Every guard, every advisor, every servant knew that this encounter was no ordinary audience. It was a lesson, a demonstration of the undeniable power of confidence, composure, and principle. And as Ali took another step, slowly closing the space between them, it became clear the reaction of everyone in that palace, from fear to awe, was exactly what Muhammad Ali had anticipated. The world outside might never fully understand it, but here, in this gilded hall, courage had spoken louder than power, and respect had found a way to command attention in the face of fear. The grand hall of Saddam Hussein's palace was thick with anticipation. Every breath, every subtle shift in posture, felt amplified. Guards who had trained their entire lives to read threats were now unsure. Advisors who had once whispered orders with authority were now frozen in awe, and Saddam Hussein himself, the man who had ruled with fear and iron control, sat on his throne, locked in a gaze with a man who radiated calm authority, Muhammad Ali. Ali's voice, soft yet commanding, broke the silence. "Power is fleeting," he said, pacing slowly across the polished marble floor. "Fear is temporary, but respect endures. And it cannot be demanded, it must be earned." Saddam's expression tightened. He had ruled through intimidation, through demonstrations of force. He had commanded nations, crushed rebellions, and silenced dissent. Yet here was a man who stood in his presence without flinching, without compromise, without fear. Ali's words weren't just statements, they were challenges to everything Saddam had built. The room's atmosphere shifted. Guards, still uneasy, exchanged glances. Advisors whispered in hurried Arabic, their voices carrying a mix of astonishment and disbelief. Some began to murmur under their breath, "He is not afraid. He does not bend. He stands as if the palace belongs to him." Even the palace servants, who had learned to move like shadows, froze mid-step, captivated by the tension between the two men. Ali stopped a few meters from Saddam, his posture relaxed yet deliberate. "You may have wealth," he continued. "You may command armies. But no amount of gold, no throne, no palace can replace character, courage, and integrity. That is the measure of true strength." For a moment, Saddam said nothing. He leaned back on his throne, studying Ali intently. Every second felt stretched into eternity. He had faced opposition before, yes, but always through intimidation, always through force. Never with quiet confidence, never with a presence that could challenge him without raising a hand. And then came the moment that changed the entire dynamic of the room. Ali reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, not for a paper, but for a simple, symbolic gesture. From inside, he pulled out a photograph of a group of children from around the world, some in classrooms, some in refugee camps, some in the streets of war-torn cities. Ali held it up, showing the reality that true power should serve. "These are the ones who watch the world," Ali said, voice steady and unwavering. "The world sees leaders not by the fear they inspire, but by the lives they touch. Power is measured by respect, not by walls or weapons." Saddam's eyes narrowed, but this time with more than irritation, there was reflection. A subtle change flickered across his face. For decades, he had been untouchable, unchallenged. And yet, here was a man who had neither bowed nor begged, who had neither shouted nor threatened, and who had spoken truths that could not be ignored. The hall, once oppressive with the weight of authority, now hummed with an uneasy realization. Muhammad Ali had shifted the balance, not by force, but by conviction. The guards relaxed slightly, though their hands lingered near their weapons. Advisors leaned in, whispering nervously, their words a mixture of awe and disbelief. Even Saddam's inner circle began to murmur quietly among themselves, acknowledging, perhaps for the first time, that respect could exist independently of fear. Ali stepped closer, maintaining eye contact unwavering. "I came here," he said, "not to fight, not to challenge with violence, but to show that courage speaks louder than power. That one man with conviction can stand firm, even in the face of intimidation. And history remembers that courage far more than tyranny." Saddam's hand hovered over the golden armrest of his throne, but he did not move to strike or command. Instead, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. The room's tension, palpable just moments ago, began to ease, not because the confrontation had ended, but because the revelation had settled in. Ali had made his point. The world watches actions, not titles. Courage commands respect. And the presence of a single man with principle could shake even the most fortified palace. For the first time, the hall seemed to acknowledge Ali as more than a guest. He was a force of nature, an emblem of unwavering conviction. And in that moment, every observer, from the highest advisor to the lowliest servant, realized the truth. Power without respect is fragile. Strength without integrity is hollow. And Muhammad Ali, standing there with calm confidence, had reminded them all of a lesson no palace walls could contain. The realization spread quietly but inevitably. Ali had not raised a fist, he had not issued a threat, yet the power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. The world outside might never see this, but inside that palace, one undeniable fact became clear. The greatest boxer of all time had delivered a victory without throwing a single punch. After the revelation, the tension in the palace did not immediately dissipate. Instead, it transformed into a quiet, charged energy, one that hummed with awe, uncertainty, and an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just transpired. Guards straightened, but their expressions had changed. Advisors who had once whispered in fear now watched, wide-eyed as if witnessing history in motion. And Saddam Hussein, the man whose word had once been law, now sat in a rare moment of reflection, staring at Muhammad Ali across the polished marble floor. Ali, calm and composed, took a deliberate step back. His message had been delivered. The confrontation was over, not with violence, not with intimidation, but with presence, courage, and principle. Every movement he made conveyed dignity and purpose. He did not boast. He did not demand respect. He simply embodied it. The room remained silent for a beat, then another. Finally, one of the senior advisors cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, perhaps we should take note of his words," he said carefully, glancing at Saddam. The dictator's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger now. Instead, there was something else, consideration, perhaps even a grudging respect. Ali continued to speak, his tone calm but firm. "Power is measured not by fear, by walls, or by wealth. It is measured by how you use it, by how you uplift others, and by the courage you show when no one else is watching. True leadership does not intimidate, it inspires." Saddam exhaled slowly. It was a deep, measured breath, the kind that comes when one acknowledges a lesson, even unwillingly. For a man who had lived surrounded by loyalty purchased through fear, this encounter was unprecedented. Ali had done what no advisor, no threat, no show of force could ever accomplish. He had made the palace itself reconsider the nature of power. The guards shifted their weight. They had expected a confrontation with fists, or perhaps a challenge that demanded obedience. Instead, they had witnessed something far more compelling. The calm confidence of a man who could command respect, without demanding it, had turned the hall upside down. Even the palace servants, who had moved like shadows for years, paused, realizing they were part of a moment larger than any they had ever experienced. Saddam's gaze lingered on Ali. For the first time, he saw a man who was unshakable, not because he wielded power, but because he stood by his convictions. He was no ordinary visitor. He was a force of principle, unwavering in the face of authority, and the palace, for all its grandeur, could not contain the lesson Ali had delivered. Ali stepped closer one last time. "I came here not to challenge you with fists, but to remind you and everyone present that courage speaks louder than fear. Integrity lasts longer than intimidation. And the world will remember how leaders act, not just how they command." Saddam's lips pressed into a thin line. He did not respond immediately. The advisors exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The guards, still uneasy, held their positions. And then, after a pause that felt eternal, Saddam spoke, not with anger, not with threat, but with measured acknowledgement. You have made your point, Muhammad Ali. I cannot ignore it." A murmur ran through the room. The guards relaxed slightly. Advisors exchanged subtle nods. Even the servants let out quiet sighs of relief. In that moment, Ali's mission was complete. He had stood his ground. He had delivered his message. And he had done so without violence, without intimidation, and without compromise. Ali nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I came here because the world watches, even in places thought untouchable. But courage is universal, respect is earned, and lessons can be learned anywhere, even in palaces guarded by fear." He turned slowly, his movements deliberate, exuding calm authority. The hall, which had been thick with tension just moments ago, now felt lighter, almost reverent. The lesson had settled. The presence of Muhammad Ali had shifted the energy of the room. The guards, advisors, and even Saddam himself had witnessed the power of principle over force, courage over intimidation, and respect over fear. As Ali reached the grand doorway, he paused and looked back one last time. "Remember," he said softly, yet firmly, "the world judges not by the walls you build, but by the lives you touch and the respect you give." Then he walked out. Each step resonated with quiet authority. The palace seemed to exhale, the tension melting into awe. Guards returned to their positions, but the lesson lingered. Advisors whispered in reverence, and Saddam, for all his power, had encountered a force he could neither control nor ignore. Muhammad Ali had left the palace, but the impact of his presence remained. The hall that once symbolized fear now carried a new understanding. Courage could stand where intimidation once ruled. Integrity could challenge authority. And one man, armed with nothing but confidence, principle, and calm determination, could change the dynamic of an entire palace without a single punch. As Muhammad Ali exited the grand palace, the echoes of his steps seemed to carry a lesson far beyond the marble walls. The guards, advisors, and servants who had witnessed the confrontation remained frozen for a moment longer, processing what had just occurred. They had all expected drama, perhaps intimidation, perhaps even conflict. But what they experienced was something far more powerful: the quiet, unshakable presence of a man who demanded nothing, and yet commanded everything through courage, principle, and integrity. The palace, for all its wealth and gold, for all its splendor and authority, had been humbled, not by violence, but by character. Ali had faced one of the most feared leaders in the world, and had emerged unscathed, not because of luck or status, but because of something far more enduring: the power of respect earned, courage shown, and composure maintained in the face of fear. Even Saddam Hussein, seated on his throne, could not ignore the shift. For decades he had ruled through fear, through intimidation, through carefully constructed hierarchies of obedience. And yet, in the presence of Muhammad Ali, the carefully maintained illusion of invincibility faltered. Ali's courage had forced a rare introspection, the realization that respect cannot be demanded, authority cannot substitute for integrity, and fear is only temporary, but the lessons of principle endure. The advisors whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some nodded subtly, acknowledging that Ali had shown them a truth they could not deny. The guards, whose hands had hovered over weapons, lowered them slowly, realizing that true strength sometimes does not need a single strike. And even the palace servants, who had moved through corridors like shadows, sensed that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a demonstration that one individual's moral courage could surpass the intimidation of empires. Ali's message was simple yet profound: power is not the ability to control others, but the ability to uphold principles, to face fear without flinching, and to inspire respect rather than demand it. In every encounter he had faced in his life, from the boxing ring to political arenas, he had proven that courage was more contagious than fear, and integrity more enduring than intimidation. This encounter with Saddam Hussein was no exception. It reinforced a timeless truth: presence, conviction, and moral courage resonate far longer than titles, thrones, or weapons. Outside the palace, the world remained unaware of the quiet yet seismic confrontation that had just occurred. But for those who had been inside, the lesson lingered in every corridor, every chamber, and every polished surface. Muhammad Ali had left more than the memory of a man entering a palace. He had left a blueprint for courage and respect. One does not need armies, threats, or intimidation to command authority. One simply needs to stand firm in principle and remain unshaken by fear. As Ali disappeared from view, the palace returned to its routine motions, yet nothing would be the same. Guards exchanged glances of newfound understanding. Advisors whispered in hushed reverence, and Saddam Hussein, the ruler who had controlled lives through fear, now confronted a subtle truth: even the most powerful cannot escape the force of moral courage. This encounter reminds us all: respect is earned, not demanded. Courage is not measured by the strength of one's fists, but by the resilience of one's spirit. And true power lies not in the ability to intimidate, but in the ability to stand firm in the face of fear, to inspire others, and to live with integrity. Muhammad Ali's exit from the palace symbolized more than just the end of a meeting. It symbolized the enduring impact of principle, the quiet victory of courage, and the lesson that real strength is silent, but undeniable.